Hi, this is Chuck Colson with this week's 2-minute warning. A few weeks ago on Breakpoint and the 2-minute warning, I told you about the dangers of utilitarianism, the insidious dangers. It rests upon the principle of doing the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, we're hearing this talked about a lot these days, the greatest good for the greatest number, in the healthcare debate. Americans are being seduced by this notion because it seems so reasonable and fair, especially in an era when medical resources are so scarce. Why wouldn't you want to do the greatest good for the greatest number? Well, the problem is that, like so many things in the postmodern era, it sounds good on its face until you start applying it. Built into the statement, doing the greatest good for the greatest number, is an inherent self-contradiction. Let me explain. You might recall a few years ago the tragic story of Christopher Reeve, the great actor, Superman, who was paralyzed in a horse riding accident. And for years, he crusaded for the exploitation of embryonic stem cells in the hope that somehow science would be able to find a cure for his paralysis and other people's illnesses. And Reeve appeared before a congressional committee one day, and he was advocating this, and one of the congressmen interrupted and said, "But that means killing embryos." He said, wait a minute, isn't it the job of government to do the greatest good for the greatest number? Nobody in that room challenged him. Amazing. Because the irony, of course, is so obvious. Reeve himself, God rest his soul, couldn't see what a dangerous argument that is for a man in a wheelchair to be making. Because if the prevailing standard were the greatest good for the greatest number, we wouldn't have spent millions of dollars to rehabilitate him, put him in a wheelchair with all the electronic controls, the breathing tube, and all the aids to support him that enabled him to be in that room. The problem is a problem of our culture today, the postmodern culture. We want to have everything our way, but then when it begins to affect us, we don't want to live with it. It's self-refuting on its face. It gives us a great apologetic opportunity to point out to people that the postmodern ideas, which sound so fashionable, are fine except you can't live with them. The Christian worldview, on the other hand, you can, because it answers every single question of life in the most reasonable and rational way that people find they can live with it. It conforms to the moral order, the way the world is really made, the way the world really is. So when you hear someone make a statement like Reeve made, pick it up, think about it. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot more in the weeks ahead on the 2-minute warning, because I think it is one of the great apologetic opportunities for Christians to show people their worldview doesn't work because it is contrary to reality. And the biblical worldview does.